Today I'm going to talk you through Parker's most recent arcane project, Viktor. This was a special collab with Eliza or Naniko-chan, and we're going to leave their Instagram down below so you can see more of their work. If you want to buy an unpainted kit for yourself, you can head over to Sephanot to grab one now. I'm going to leave the link below for there too. The painted one in this video is available in our store. So before we get to painting, a quick reminder, Parker really likes to mix his colours. If you are looking to replicate his work, don't forget you don't have to go out and buy all of the same paints as I've listed below, just colour match his mix to your existing collection. And with that, let's get to it. To start, Parker base coats Viktor's waistcoat with a sponge, getting an all-over coverage using a mix of Titan Buff and Burnt Umber with a small amount of Mars Yellow Deep. The sponge really helps to put some texture into the piece. For some of the greyer parts you see at the sides of his waistcoat, Parker also incorporated light phthalo blue and Payne's grey. Viktor's waistcoat uses a lot of similar shades, so keeping some options on the wet palette helps Parker to make small adjustments and keep some variety to the clothing whilst also staying complementary to each other. Moving on to his brown undershirt, and Parker mostly uses raw umber with some sepia ink to help darken the brown a bit more. He uses a large brush for this as it needs a slightly more precise application and saves him some time masking. When it comes to the arms, Parker ran the same mix through the airbrush. Turning back to the waistcoat, Parker now needs to start carefully painting in the panels. For this, he uses his size 4 Raphael Kolinsky sable brush for a careful application, choosing different shades for different areas. Now he begins to incorporate the arcane art style by going for quite stylized shadows. If you've seen any of Parker's painting before, you'll know he often switches up his tools to help achieve variety in texture, as well as blend together some of all of the different tools. So here he switches between brush, sponge and airbrush. With the most of the waistcoat colours done, Parker now has some details to do. Thankfully, Eliza sculpted these details as recessed areas, so it helps getting the lines nice and straight, offering a bit of guidance for painting. Next, Parker gets the arms of his shirt back out to give the arcane treatment with some brushed on shadows in the creases of the fabric. Now we get to see some freehand as Viktor needs some pinstripes on the sleeves of his shirt. For freehand like this, just take it slow and steady using a brush that will hold a good point. Here's a little check-in on where he's at, and we're nearly there on the torso. Parker now attends to the shirt V again, going in for some shadows. For Viktor's tie, Parker uses red oxide and Pyrrole red. With just one small detail left, Parker uses a mix of Payne's grey and light orange to paint the buttons on his sleeve cuff. For Viktor's pale skin tone, Parker used one of his go-to mixes, Titan Mars Pale, Burnt Sienna and Red Violet. There's not too much skin on Viktor, so he starts by base coating his arms with the brush, using the wet palette to allow some variation in shades. Before he moves on to the top coat of the skin, he also base coats the face, considering highlights and shadows by adjusting the brush painted strokes. Using the same mix, Parker applies a top coat through his airbrush. Using light layers with careful control of the airbrush, he's able to utilise the base coated shadows and highlights brushed on. Parker uses his newly found airbrush glaze to add some highlights to Viktor's skin tone. For the shading, he uses pastels. He breaks a small bit off his Sennelier pastel, choosing a colour to complement Viktor's skin tone. He crushes it up and applies with a brush to some areas such as between his fingers. The sponge allows Parker to blend in the pigment and brush away the loose dust. Finally, he seals his pastels with a varnish. Moving on to Viktor's head, and Parker opts to start with his hair. This is one of those model cuts we love to see, as we are able to paint his hair separately, so everybody think Eliza. Parker uses phthalo green, blue and red oxide to create this brown colour, adding some raw umber to create this dark brown colour. He first applies an all-over coverage with an airbrush. Next, he uses a lighter mix from his wet palette to sponge on some highlights. With the hair done, Parker focuses on Viktor's face. He crushes up some pastels, ready to apply some shadows focusing on his eyes, chin, neck and around the nose. Once brushed on, he uses the sponge to rub in the pigment and brush off the loose powder at the same time. Okay, so we accidentally trailed off camera a little bit for the eye base coat, but before we moved on to the whites of his eyes, Parker lays his usual blood vessel colour base coat. We cover this in pretty much all other videos, so do make your way through our other videos for more information on this. He uses titanium white for the whites of the eyes before going in to paint his iris colour. He keeps Mars Yellow Deep, Cadmium Primrose and a couple of ink choices ready to mix on his wet palette to keep adjusting the shades. He chooses Raw Sienna and Raw Umber inks. With the iris colour done, he paints in Viktor's freckles. Now to paint his pupil, Parker uses black Indian ink to carefully dot in. The final touch for his eyes is that distinctive arcane light reflection. For this, he turns back to some of the existing mixes on his wet palette, using something close to white. The final layers for his face is using the blood vessel mix he used for the eyes to paint in his lips. Parker first gets an overall brown coverage for Viktor's legs using raw umber. Next, he uses Payne's Grey to paint in his leg brace. Whilst we let that first coat of the metalwork dry, Parker switches back to his trousers to use an adjusted brown mix to carefully airbrush some shadows. He makes sure to do the same all around the leg brace, as the depth from wearing the leg brace over his trousers would cast shadows. For the small metal buttons on his trousers, Parker uses his most simple grey mix, using Payne's Grey and light orange. He carefully brush paints this on. Now it's time to add some highlights to the metal. Parker uses his Beauty Blender sponge by dabbing into the mix of Payne's Grey, which has a small amount of light orange too. Once applied to the edges of the metalwork, he turns to the airbrush to blend it all back out. As I always say, Parker likes to alternate his tools as they all have slightly different uses but all complement each other perfectly. His painting style uses fine and careful application, so he's able to build up layers switching between these tools without causing any unwanted texture from too many thick layers of paint. With the metal leg brace appropriately highlighted, he now uses the brush to highlight the trouser section of this piece. For the red at the top of the leg brace, he uses crimson with a small amount of dioxazine violet, all carefully applied using his size 4 Raphael Kolinsky sable brush. Now we move on to Viktor's crutch and his book. Starting with the crutch, Parker gets an all-over grey base coat using Payne's Grey with a small addition of light orange. The crutch has some red detailing for which to use the same crimson mix, but we just use for the leg brace itself. Again, he alternates the tools using the Beauty Blender with the grey mix to put some texture on the crutch and then blending it back out again with the airbrush. For these brass sections of the crutch, he base coats of dark brown using raw umber and sepia ink. Now again, we need to make this non-metallic paint look metal. So he grabbed his sponge, laid out some Mars Yellow Deep and Cadmium Primrose on the wet palette to mix in with the brown. He then gently applies the dark yellow on the brown base coat. Now he's created a gentle blend with the sponge, he uses his paintbrush to add some brighter highlights along the very edges of the metalwork. Parker moves on to Viktor's notebook. He starts with the pages, getting that aged look using Antelope Brown ink and Titan Buff through the airbrush. He adds more Titan Buff to start getting lighter coloured areas in some places. Now these open pages allow for some artistic freedom. He decided to stick with the university outfit look, and Parker freehands in what definitely looks to me like some hex text schematics. I would love to know what you would draw in here. Maybe JVic fanfic, a cute little sketch of Jay's, or would you stick to the academic vibes too? Drop a comment and let us know. For this freehand, Park uses his 000 brush to allow for fine detail. These Raphael Klinsky sable brushes hold a really nice point, so it lets him paint small details accurately like this. For the colour, he just used So Flat Black. When it comes to freehand, just remember to take it slow and be patient. And here is the finished model. As we said up top, Eliza is new to sculpting and absolutely smashing it, so do go drop them a follow. Thank you all so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please sub, leave a like, and a comment below what other characters you might want to see Parker paint. A special thanks to all of our patrons on screen. We could not be making these videos without your support. We will catch you all in the next one.